The ICF can be a really useful framework for basically guiding us in how to think about our patients, about their needs, about our treatment approach, about the goal-setting process. Early in my career, I think I made quite a few mistakes that the ICF kind of highlights. And one of the mistakes that I made was that I think I was very focused on treating people's impairments. Right? So remember in the previous page, I wrote about the what an impairment is. Right? It's a change in body function. Changes in body function, like poor word finding, cause problems. Right? Problems of being able to engage in the activities that one engaged in. Problems being able to participate in social encounters with others. So together, impairments in body function, limitations in activities and participation, both of those problems fall under the heading of disability. Right? So a person, we can say a disability can include both an impaired body function and the practical problems that come along with it. And I didn't pay attention very well to those restrictions, those problems engaging in activities and participation. And what I missed out on, quite honestly, by not doing that, of course my patients missed out, unfortunately, but what I missed out on as a clinician was that, let's say word finding difficulty is a very big topic, right? As adults, we have 30 to 60,000 word vocabularies. So how does one begin to choose which words to have your patients practice? Well, if I was paying attention to the problems of activities and participation, I might have discovered that this particular patient, and I had a patient like this, he could no longer make a bet at the racetrack, which is right not far from my house, Santa Anita racetrack. That was a limitation in activities. Another patient I had recently, and we addressed this, so I figured it out by now. He loved to talk about politics, and he had great difficulty doing that. So both of those, that activity, going to the racetrack and betting, that participation and conversation about politics, those both give me the beginnings of a focus for, let's say, the kind of vocabulary that I might want to focus on in treatment. But also it gives focus to the patient. It gives them something. Of course, patients will want to improve whatever function is impaired, like word finding difficulty. But when we also add in a focus on improving the ability to engage in activity, we give people a tangible motivator for why they should be working on their home practice, etc. We have something that is a tangible, meaningful indicator of progress, right? Because if therapy is going the way we hope it should, the person who couldn't place a bet at the racetrack is now able to place a bet at the racetrack. And now they get that sense of accomplishment, and that's very motivating. And of course, the next goal that we choose from them, now their belief in themselves, their self-efficacy, which we'll talk about later when we talk about more about motivation. Self-efficacy being one's belief in one's ability to do a very particular task. Self-efficacy plays a big role in motivation because, simply stated, we tend to avoid tasks we don't think we can accomplish, right? But we do approach tasks and goals that we do think we can accomplish. So the ICF framework, although fairly general, fairly broad, if we pay attention to thinking about it and how we can incorporate it, I think there are multiple advantages for us. Of course, as I pointed out in the text on the previous page, another advantage is just simply that those terms, disability, impairment, activities, participation, are used in our treatment literature, and so it's good for us to know what those words mean. So I'm going to introduce a case, and we'll come back to this case in the course of the semester. This is the case of Mr. Smith. And I wrote about Mr. Smith in a book chapter that, depending on when it's published, you may or may not see. No matter. If it's not published in time, I'll certainly fill in enough of the details so you understand what was going on with him. And you can see some of the basic information here on the page about Mr. Smith, so I won't go over that. I think that in the context of thinking about the ICF, here are a couple points that I think are relevant in terms of Mr. Smith's case. So Mr. Smith was seen by a therapist before he came to me. The therapist did choose an activity-based goal, and that activity-based goal was to communicate the day's events to his wife when his wife was working when she came home. That seems like a very reasonable goal. Mr. Smith was discharged after not too much therapy, 3 months of outpatient therapy, because of a lack of significant improvement, the therapist's judgment of a lack of motivation, poor adherence to his home practice routines, etc. In this ICF framework, you've seen that there are contextual factors that also play an influence on whether or not people engage in activities or different forms of participation. In other words, it's not just their body function problems, right? Their language problems that serve as some kind of barrier to them engaging in an activity. Contextual factors, environmental factors, the patient's own attitudes, I would add in their motivation, etc., are important factors to think about. And one of the factors missed with Mr. Smith was that essentially the goal was suggested by his wife. And it wasn't a goal that was really intrinsically interesting to him. And even more than it not being intrinsically interesting to him, when I spoke to him at some length about the goal, finally what kind of came out in our conversation was that he felt like the goal was in some ways a means of checking up on him. In other words, he suspected that his wife did not trust him to be home alone, or didn't completely trust him. And so she wanted a report of what he was up to during the day when she was gone. So there was this controlling element coming from the environment, essentially, or his wife. And so this particular goal, although it seemed very reasonable on the surface, was was not a motivating goal. And so it's not surprising that despite a lot of encouragement, and perhaps, I don't know, let's say threat of discharge, Mr. Smith never really found the energy to practice and work towards achieving this goal. Like I said, we'll talk more about Mr. Smith as we go on. What we're going to do now in this particular lecture is do an overview of some of the different cognitive and language functions that we're going to be talking about in this course.